Let us focus our thoughts for a moment. May we, as we open our minds and hearts to new ideas, new experiences, take yet another step forward, not only in our own self-realization, but in our realization of the world's needs. This we pray as those born into love, yet ever seeking it. Amen. It has been a very, very busy week, and we have watched as people have offered themselves, poured their energy into this place. And I want to speak about that pouring of one's energy into something, so that which we might refer to as self-sacrifice. Because over the long run, if you give your entire life to something, that's exactly what you're doing. You are sacrificing perhaps some of your own realization, your own choices, your own things that you want for the greater good, for a particular project, for someone else. And you pour your life into it, sacrificing your own life, and so live your life in that particular way. But George Herbert Palmer's opening segment on self-sacrifice was interesting in that it brought forward 4 of the historical approaches to self-sacrifice that I want to look at over the course of the time that I'm speaking today. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about this process of self-realization, which he raises as one of the most important things of the human endeavor. One of the most important principles is that we come to our greatest self, that we realize the fullness of ourselves through the course of our lifetime, and how that totters on this idea of self-sacrifice. Self-realization seems to be a big thing these days. The world seems to be rolling more in favor of us getting what it is that we want, learning what it is that we want to learn, fulfilling our own interests and desires, and coming to know ourselves more completely. I often speak in this place about looking in another's eyes so that we may come to know ourselves more completely. That realization of ourselves, that coming to understand who we are, how it is that we interact with one another in relationship, how we function in a group, what needs it is that we are trying to get met, and how we are doing that, whether it's appropriate or whether it's not, and if the latter, what we can do to shift and change that a little bit. Self-realization is an extremely important part of the human journey. Because if we don't come to understand ourselves, if we don't realize our full potential, then perhaps we fall short of what we might have offered, what we might have known, what we might have seen. I love to hear my mother talk as she reflects back about her life, always counting up the number of ways in which her life has been incredibly blessed. And those who know her will recognize that she's been incredibly blessed in many of those ways of which she speaks. But we also know that she was significantly and seriously compromised, both by her time, in her relationships, in the choices of career, and the times that she took off from her career, both to care for a husband and to raise a family. And we know that self-realized, she may have actually accomplished much more, learned much more, felt much more deeply than she does. I say that of my mother, but most of you could probably say exactly the same thing about your mothers, and perhaps even the same thing about your fathers, because we reflect the community in which we grow up in and in which we function in. And as the world becomes more self-realized, our ability to support and encourage one another in that journey has grown. But what does a fully self-realized world look like? Is it one in which everyone is loving everyone else, or is it one in which we're all running our own little narrow track toward self-realization and getting what it is that we want and expending our energies in ways that feel right for us and all of that kind of stuff? Is it our own personal spiritual quest for self-fulfillment that each of us undergoes regardless of what the group may want or think or what might be better for everyone? Is it that extreme of self-indulgence that self-realization ultimately is? Self-sacrifice flips that on its side, because self-sacrifice suggests that there is a greater whole that we need to be aware of, that self-realization has to be limited sometimes by what's going on in community, by how we interact with others, by what the world is spinning into, and not just our own little world where we happen to be living and working and loving at that particular time, but the entire world around us. Does self-sacrifice not commit us to perhaps limiting some of our own self-indulgent behavior, of which self-realization, our pursuit of self-realization, may be? It may be a form of self-indulgence at some point or another. When we look at, on a largely political scale, and we think about that fine line I was trying to walk during the prayer time, we can see those two extremes at play in the political world. And over the course of the next decade or so, perhaps, as they will stretch even further apart, as those who are self-actualizing, self-realizing, and those who believe that sacrificing for the greater good grow farther and farther apart in their understanding. Liberalism, which used to sort of temper the notions of those on the far left so that they could be worked into a society that engaged and stimulated and activated the creative energies and impulse of individuals, seems to be one of the casualties of that great split. So it's walking that center line somehow, that place where we are actually trying to figure out who we are and what we have to offer this world, and the self-sacrifice that comes as we try to figure out our place in the group and how that might be enhanced. Scott spoke about the conference he was at on Friday, and one of the stories that the speaker, who is one of the founders of the Me to We movement that many of you will be familiar with, spoke of someone who works at that organization now who has only one arm. One of the things that happens where he grew up is that rebels will come into a village and recruit young boys for work in their army, turn them into child soldiers. And if a young boy refuses to go into the army, they cut off his right arm, so that he can never actually participate in working for the government in a military manner, and so fight the rebels. And so this young man who currently works for that federation, when they came into his village to participate or to troll it for new recruits for the rebel movement, he stood up and said that he was not going to go, that the village there was a village of peace, and that he did not want to be a soldier for the rebels. And then he slammed his arm down on the table, and they cut it off. He did that self-sacrificing move because he recognized that that community needed a leader at that moment in time, and that small boy was that leader at that point in time. And this brings me to these historical understandings of self-sacrifice. And we can discuss whether or not we agree with one or the other, or which it is. Indeed, I didn't actually finish Palmer's article because I was so enchanted with the interplay of these four historical models. The first historical way of looking at self-sacrifice is saying that it's psychologically impossible, that there's no such thing as self-sacrifice, that someone who slams their arm down on the table to have it cut off in that move, which is the one that Palmer's talking about, that we all kind of go, oh, could I have done that? That reverence that we have for self-sacrifice? Psychologically, the argument goes, we're really only just serving ourselves, that it's really for our own good that we sacrifice. And many of us will know people who live that out in their lives. They will give everything for someone else, and they appear to be giving. But when we sit back and think about it for a little while, we think, they're really getting something out of this. And that's the argument, is that no one really self-sacrifices. They're really getting something out of it. I wonder, when an arm hits the table, though, if that's really what's happening. The next one is that self-sacrifice is a sad necessity. That because we exist in such tight groups, because there are so many of us, because we have so many different interests and so many demands on us, that we have to sacrifice our own choices and our own ideals in order to get along. Otherwise, we'd be, wiping each other off the slate, all the time. Get away from here. I got my own thing to do. So we end up compromising, lobbing off portions of ourselves in order to accommodate those around us. A sad necessity, that is self-sacrifice. On Tuesday at Presbytery, they read the parable of the naked woman, which I have shared with you on more than one occasion, I think. It's a parable that lifts up the reality that we do that. We lob off whole portions of ourselves in order to make ourselves palatable for whatever company or whatever relationship it is that we happen to be in. So self-sacrifice, in this other argument, is a sad necessity. There are others then who say that it's actually needless, that there is no such thing as self-sacrifice, that whenever someone self-sacrifices or does what would be identified as that, it is really towards a greater enlargement of the whole, that as one of the whole, we are all benefiting from that choice, from that behavior. And so it isn't a self-sacrificial thing, it's actually a group validation, a group self-realization thing that is happening in that. And then there are others. The fourth one is just that anyone who lays their arm down on the table like that is insane. That they have not taken the time, that they don't have the ability, or something has not allowed them to consider what it is that they're really doing. And when we see acts of heroism, it's often the person will say, I didn't take the time to think, I just knew it had to be done. So the argument for insanity comes in there somewhere. Now, when I began my reading and looking at what I wanted to speak about this week, the theme that I had identified was self-sacrifice for ourselves, about giving it up for ourselves. What do we sacrifice in order that we ourselves are stronger, are bigger, that we have a little reprieve from some of the demands on our time? What is it that we will give up in order to create that space for us? And I want to go there, but I want to actually go again to the deep roots of our tradition, and to question whether Palmer, recognizing the reverence with which we approach self-sacrifice, whether he isn't being informed by a religious tradition in which self-sacrifice has been made the ultimate moral value, that giving up one's life for the lives of others hasn't been embedded in our psyches as a meme or as a story that is so powerful that we will always bow our heads in reverence for those who sacrifice their lives, their arms, their place in society in order that everyone can benefit. I think that story that comes through the whole of our Christian tradition is one that has placed that upon the table as something for us to revere and hold as valid, and that the time has come for us to look at some of these other ways of seeing self-sacrifice and asking ourselves whether or not that is the highest moral value, self-sacrifice. But back to you. And back to what it is you do in your life, and back to who it is you share your life with, and back to their demands on your time, and back to the lists of things that you make out that are going to make your life better, your world easier, the commitments that you have a little more comfortable. Back to the reflections that you have from people around you on who you are and what they want you to be, and back to the ways that you respond to that. And back to your own understanding of yourself and the picture that you have of yourself, both when you look in the mirror in the morning and at night and when you walk through your day. Who are you? And how often do you take time to actually answer that question? Who am I? And what am I giving up for me to be this? What is it that I set aside in order for me to be this? And is it of moral value, reverential value, for me to give those things up to be the things that I am when I look in that mirror in the morning and again at night and all the moments in between? I believe that we create ourselves, as I said in one of the opening moments of this service, we create ourselves of the moments and the choices that we make. We're moving toward being grown-ups in that sense of self-realization by making choices in our everyday, by choosing who we are going to be with, where we put our energy, what it is we spill our life into. And that's the story that is the root of our tradition, which is the one that I most take into my center. That Jesus, who is the founder of Christianity, many will say, but I think he just lived his life the way he needed to live his life, founder or no founder, that he poured his life into his passions. And sometimes they were phenomenal. And he challenged the way people were, and he created a better world and a better space, a bigger space for people to understand who they were in it, self-realized. And sometimes he bumped into people in such a bad way that you got to wonder if a little self-sacrifice a little earlier on might have made for a happier group of people that were traveling around with him. But that idea of pouring our life out for something, that's the image that I take away from that life, if and when it was lived. What is it I want to pour my life into? And how do I feed myself so that I have the energy to do so? When we look at ourselves in the mirror in the morning and check ourselves out again at night, are those things that we have done in all those intervening moments, have they been fulfilling what it is that we want to pour our lives into? What is it that we want to pour the moments of our days out for? When I left Presbytery on Tuesday night on my drive home, I thought, oh my goodness, I just spent 2 hours arguing about governance, about motions, and whether they were worded properly, and whether it was an amendment to the motion I had made or whether it was just a motion and we had to get the first one off the table so we could deal with the second one and then get back to the first one. 2 hours. And there were probably 70 or 80 people there, so we're up to 140 hours or more. And then that those questions needed to be dealt with by everyone across the church. Every single presbytery in the United Church of Canada had to deal with those issues. So we're at thousands and thousands and thousands of moments of life energy spilled out into that endeavor. And the question is that where we want to spill our lives? Is that what we want to do with our lives? This morning when you got up and looked in the mirror, you didn't even think about that because I hadn't told you about it. But tonight when you go home and you look in the mirror, I really want you to think about that. I really want you to think about what you poured your precious moments into. We often hear it said that if I just had more time, but the wise response has been given to me often, you have the same amount of time as everybody else. Use it the way you want. So when it comes to self-sacrifice, I would warrant that we need to sacrifice some of the choices that we make on a daily basis, some of the things that we do as part of our routine, maybe even some of the people we choose to spend our time with, so that we can actually spill our lives into what it is that we love, not ourselves, because we are not the only people here. I mean, you as an individual, if you pour all your time and energy into yourself, then nobody's going to want to spend a lot of time with you, which moves you outside of human community, which moves you out of my definition of humanity. But spilling our lives into one another, into the endeavor of creating beauty, into the moments that offer creativity to the world, into the possibility of seeing something beautiful where nothing was seen before, into the affirmation of another simply because they are, into a reflection of the world back at itself so that it might see itself more fully, into actions that are being taken politically to change the world, or into moments of silence that allow and create space for others to take a step out of their lives so that they can find out who they are. Where is it that we choose to pour those moments of our lives. I don't believe that we can be hell-bent for self-realization without pausing and finding out what it is that's eclipsing us from the realization of humanity's beauty, the full realization of humanity's beauty. And whether it's hours spent at presbytery or days on Facebook, whatever it is that takes your moments away from what it is you want to spill them into, sacrifice that. There will be those who will say that you're just doing it for yourself. That would be an accurate assessment. There will be those who will say that it's a sad necessity that you have to cut those things out of your life to take care of yourself. You wish you could do it all. There will be those who will say it's not sacrifice at all. You're really doing it for the greater good. You know, if you don't take care of yourself, how can you take care of anybody else? And there will be those who say that you're just insane. Those 4 different definitions of self-sacrifice will come out. But you will have found, I believe, you will have found a beauty that is so deeply profound within you, that has been there all along, that you rarely take the opportunity to look at, that you rarely take the opportunity to affirm. And when you stand in front of that mirror at whatever day's end it is, whether it's today or a week from now, or it takes you 6 years to figure this out, you will see that beauty looking back at you. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you figure that out. We're here to help them figure that out. We're here to figure it out. So let's do that. Amen.